For our second partial evaluation, we had to read the book The Fourth Industrial Revolution by Klaus Schwab. And there are a lot of many interesting things about this book, but first I'm gonna talk a little bit about who the author was. So Klaus Schwab is actually a German professor and an economist that founded the World Economic Forum, which basically is this international and known governmental organization whose purpose is to improve the state of the world by engaging in business, political, academic, and other leaders of society to shape global, regional, and industry agendas. Under his leadership, it is important to note that the forum has been a driver for reconciliation efforts in different parts of the world, acting as a catalyst of numerous collaborations and international initiatives. Now, I mention this because I think that with this in mind, it's really interesting to look back at the book because the author, I think we can assume that he's a very analytical person and has a really business-like mindset, I think. So this really explains how he can see and formulate all of these theories about how the world is gonna be due to the fourth industrial revolution and what is like the future for business and us as people. So with this in mind, now I'm gonna start talking a little bit about the book. So the book is divided in three big parts, in three chapters. The first one is a summary that about the fourth industrial revolution, like what it is. The second talks about the main technologies that have been transformed due to this revolution. And finally, he talks a little bit about the impact of the revolution and the challenges that we as a society are gonna have to face. So now I'm gonna start talking a little bit about the first chapter of the book, which is the summary about the fourth industrial revolution. But before talking about this, we have to be clear in what a revolution is. And a revolution is this movement that dictates a radical and abrupt change when new technologies develop. Here we can see this with the past industrial revolutions, which the first one was created due to the vapor machine, the vapor motor, which was an invention that changed literally how industries worked up to that point. It changed production, transportation, and it was really influential in its time. And then we can see, for example, in the second industrial revolution, how this was really dictated by new social and work models that were developed that were starting to get implemented, and it also changed the mentality of how people worked and how people really just acted in general. However, it is really interesting to see with the fourth industrial revolution that each technology that was developed that led up to this point, it works not only as a collective but also individually. Like each separate technology really has shaped society in a very different way. We can see this with automatization, with for example, portable machines like cell phones, like laptops, with the literally Wi-Fi as it is. Like each one of them, of these things, work as an individual in shaping and changing and evolving society as we know it today. This fourth industrial revolution started developing at the beginning of the century, and it is really interesting to see how it is growing faster and wider than all of the past revolutions that we had known. It is an revolution sorry, that was able to mix the physical, the spiritual, and the biological aspects of us human beings, and this also set these revolutions apart from all of the other ones that came in the past. However, this does not mean that this revolution doesn't have any reason for us to be concerned about. For example, because it is growing so fast And with these new technologies that are constantly evolving and are getting more sophisticated with the passing of time, we not all of us have the abilities or the resources to fully understand all of these changes, or we don't come with the abilities to be able to get to know how all of this works. And in general, I think that it can be a motor to create huge inequality in society. We can see this with the relation of the consumers and the producers, which Schwab explained in the book, where the consumers are constantly winning in the fourth industrial revolution because now they have new products and services that they didn't have access to before, and that is not necessarily costing them anything like monetary wise. However, producers are at risk of losing their jobs and losing their businesses because they cannot keep up with these new technologies and hence with the new demands that the public has. Now, regarding the second chapter of the book, we can see that the main technologies that are going to be transformed and that are currently being transformed are divided into three main sectors, which are the physical, the biological, and the digitals. These were the ones that I was mentioning previously that are very particular to this industrial revolution and that was not present in the past industrial revolutions. Regarding the physical transformations, we can see that one of the main creations or technologies developed in this area are autonomous vehicles. We can see this, for example, with drones, which is something that I think is pretty common nowadays, but we are not aware of the range of uses that it is able to have. It can help with agriculture, it can help water the plants and be able to spread everything that the piece of land needs in order for plants to grow and agriculture to be more efficient. But just as it can be used for something good, it can also be used, for example, for war, to be able to do face recognition or image recognition and attack the enemies of the party of the war that is using this technology. Also, there is 3D impressions, which, as we know, is an impression that is created by layers, and it is being used nowadays in the auto, in the car sector, the automobile sectors, in aeronautics, and also in the medical sector. It is actually really interesting to see what we are doing with this technology because hopefully we are able to use 3D printing to do organ replacement, and I think this can be actually a really huge deal for us as a society. Then we have advanced robotics, which, as we know, robots are being created, and each time their technology is more flexible and more advanced. They're more sophisticated, and actually, with the creation of sophisticated AIs, they are able to analyze and create strategies and have really human-like behavior. And finally, we have the creation of new materials that are lighter, more resistant, recyclable, and adaptable. And this is really interesting because we're talking about materials that are adaptable to, for example, their environment. And this could be huge for things that have to be exposed, for example, to the outside, that it can be more resistant to the changes in the weather and climate conditions and all of this sort of stuff. I think that the possibilities of what we can do with this are actually kind of endless, so that sounds really interesting to see. Regarding the digital transformations, we have, as we know, portable pieces of technology, as I like to say, which are smartphones, tablets, laptops, and pretty much everything that is connected to the internet, which is pretty much everything that we use in our academic and professional lives. I don't think that we're able to imagine a society without working without any internet or Wi-Fi nowadays. So it is kind of scary to see how dependent we are on these technologies. But it is, we cannot deny that it's something that is actually really really useful. We have also the creation of blockchain, which we have seen in class a little bit about it, and we can see how it can be really helpful in making any sort of contracts and just protecting information. And finally, we have these digital platforms that are services, offer services that help connect each other easily. For example, we have Uber, Airbnb, these digital platforms that are able to reinvent some some rubros, sorry, I forgot the word, but some segments of the market, reducing significantly the costs. Finally, in the last category of the principal technologies that are being transformed, we can see the biological like creations and technologies related to biology. For example, there is genetic modification which is being proposed to enhance, for example, the foods that we eat so they can be more, um, they can bring more nourishment to our bodies, they can be better for us. We have DNA configurations, which is being used, for example, in animals, in cows, so their milk can have more nutrients for us. And then we have the neurotechnologies. I think that in the biological sector is where we are developing slower compared to the other sectors of the technological transformations. However, I think that some of these things, even if we're not necessarily in contact to them daily as we are with digital platforms and these sort of things, they are creating huge things that are gonna have a big impact in our lives, definitely. Finally, the third chapter of the book talks about the impact that the fourth industrial revolution is gonna have and the challenges that we as a society are gonna have to face. And I think that the first challenge that we're facing is just even wondering how ethical it is, everything that we're doing. I think that it is something that we don't tend to question that much, and when we tend to think about this particular industrial revolution, we just think about the things we are more in touch with, like our cell phones, like apps like Uber, and all of these sort of things. But there is this aspect of how ethical it is to be creating, for example, these AIs, to be creating these automatization processes that are gonna probably leave many people without a job. And I just think that it is a question we don't really ask ourselves, and we should be asking ourselves more. But even without this, I think there are more and some other challenges that are more palpable to put it in some way. And for example, it is, we can see this in the impact that is this industrial revolution can have in technology. There's people that strongly believes and it sees the more optimistic outcome that with the new technologies that are being created, like yes, some people are gonna be replacing their jobs by these technologies, but this does not mean that they're gonna end up jobless. This just means that they're gonna move to other positions, and I would like to think that this is gonna be the way that it's gonna go. That instead of doing tiring labor or repetitive tasks, we're gonna be able to focus on being more analytical and more strategical, or even being more creative in our work field. However, there is this other part, as I was mentioning before, that is just that I strongly believe that there's gonna be a massive unemployment rate, and I don't think that it's gonna be necessarily one or the other. It's gonna be sort of a combination, but it is definitely an impact that maybe we're not realizing right now, how big it's gonna be. Also, there's this aspect that talks about this revolution as something that should be global. However, I don't think it is. It really isn't, because what happens to countries that are developing countries that cannot adapt to the technological advancements that this revolution is offering. What happens, for example, in indigenous communities or in communities in Africa, for example, where they barely have any Wi-Fi, any internet, any signal, where the country itself doesn't have the resources to keep up with all of these trends that we're seeing in the world. This is something that has really kept me thinking since I read the book, because we think of the Industrial Revolution in a very privileged position, I would like to think. And sadly, this is not the reality for everyone. So, how the how are these countries that are already have this gap between the high income countries, like for example, any European country, with these countries that have a slower development? Like, we already have this gap. How bigger is gonna grow because of this industrial revolution. Finally, to conclude this analysis, there is this quote at the last chapter of the book, which says, "The future enters into us in order to transform itself in us long before it happens." And it really gets me thinking, like, how can we adapt into all of the changes that are going on, and how can we transform ourselves to adapt in the future? Like, these all of these changes are things that we are creating. All of these changes are not by accident, and we may not know the impact they're gonna have yet in the future, but it is really interesting for me to think, how are we gonna have to change, how are we gonna have to adapt, and how our lifestyle as we know it is not gonna be able to be the same anymore. I definitely think that this fourth industrial revolution is gonna be, I think that I would dare to say, the one with the most impact in how we work, because it's the one with the more, I don't know how to say, like with the biggest changes we have ever seen. And I am partly excited to see how it's gonna be, but also there's a part of me that's scared that we're not gonna be prepared to face the consequences of our actions, to face all of this technology that we're gonna be surrounding ourselves with, and kind of forget a little bit of the human part that is inside every one of us. But yeah, it is really interesting to see how we have been able, to evolve as a race, as a human race. And I can't wait to see what's gonna come next, what the fifth industrial revolution is gonna look like.